Well, I suppose it's time to start making my fall-winter wardrobe. But what to make? That'll do. I have my bodice block right here, and what we're going to do is we're going to start by tracing this off. Now we're just going to fill in the darts. And same with this guy down here. And there we go. We have our first bodice block. So we'll just mark this as front. And now we're going to cut around, and then we'll cut both of these. And then I'm going to use an axis point to get this to squish together. All right, and for the slash and spread technique, basically I'm going to extend the dart here and here. We're going to cut, and that'll give us a pivot point. So first we'll cut out the that's step one, and now we have this wider wedge, which is our dart. We'll just tape that down. And now I'm going to draw a perpendicular line down where the dart is. So we'll do it like that. And we'll cut that line here, and then this one that's already open. Now we'll just swing this around like this. We're going to have to true up our lines and everything because this is not accurate, and I'm definitely making a muslin of this or a toile of this before I do anything. And now we'll tape this piece of paper underneath, and apparently there's an easier way to do this where you just use a pivot method. I'm not advanced in pattern drafting. This is like my first time drafting any pattern, so it's a lot to work on. Now we have a perpendicular line that runs here, and then we're gonna connect the bottom edge here to like the arm side here. So I'm going to make a point right here, and I'm just eyeballing this. So we're going to do one of these right here where we measure up that dart leg, the bottom of the dart, with that little notch right there. And then we'll also do one right here. Okay. And then we'll cut along this one. All right. So now that we have that all cut, we'll just bring this edge together like this. So we close the dart and we'll tape it down. So now, and this is all without seam allowances, by the way. So if you're following along, make sure yours does not have seam allowance on it. But anyway, this is looking really good. So now we're just going to trace it onto a new piece of paper. Okay, so I have a new piece of paper, and I haven't really decided if I want to just tape this down and retrace it or what. I think I'm going to retrace this. It's just going to be kind of hard because it's not like the heavy mat board that I'm using to trace the initial pattern off. So whatever. Anyway, we're going to actually lengthen this by a couple inches. So to do that too. But basically, we have this all done. Now I'm going to straighten out the side seams a little too, because I want it to look really boxy. And I think I'm going to add on some ease to this as well. And there we have it. You have that nice vest look. And so we'll just add the green line to this, mark this as the front, and we're ready to cut out our toile for the top portion, the two front panels, and then we'll just do one on the back, and that'll be on the fold. Also to the front, we're going to add the 5/8 inch seam allowance, but for right now, I think we're just going to cut out as is, and once I'm starting the toile, I'll add that 5/8 inch seam allowance in. So we'll just trace this pattern off. A couple of notes, I decided to give myself some more ease along both side seams. And then I did add quite a bit to the hem, but I think I'm going to need to add even more just the way that I want this to fit. I also think that I'm going to make this a little less close to the neckline. So I think I'm going to take about an inch off here, and we'll see what we get from that. Now I'll just trace off the back. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take out the shoulder dart just because I don't want to mess with the shoulder or the armhole. as much as I would prefer messing with the dart that runs down the bodice back. So we'll cut this one to here, similar to how we did the front. Then we'll do the slash and spread method to get rid of that. And we'll just do that. Now we'll just need to take that down. And because this paper is from the craft roll, it's all tangly and I don't like it. It keeps rolling on itself, but we'll just have to make it work. So now we'll put this down here and we're going to do the similar process that we did to the front. We'll tape this down here and I'm going to cut buffering this. That way we'll be able to maneuver this better. Similar how we did to the last one, we're going to just mark right here. We're going to measure from that bottom dart leg to here. And then to here. And then we'll do this. We're going to cut this, and then we'll cut the longer side. And then I'm put another piece of paper behind this. I'm just going to open it out, close it up to where I want it to be. And I think that's how you do it. But to be honest, I don't know. I haven't pattern drafted before. Again, this is my first project that I'm doing. So it's a learn with me experiment. And if this all goes, not to plan, what we're going to do is take a t-shirt and trace around it and call it a day, and we'll just add side seam allowance. But anyway, I think that looks full enough. We're going to trace this again onto another piece of paper, add more, and then we're going to verify that these two align, and then we'll just add in the leftover amount. Now I've traced my pattern from that one that we just did, and I want to get rid of some of the fullness in the hips because again, we're not going to have that fullness. I'm actually adding more seam allowance to this and everything. So this is going to be cut back on the center back fold. So I'm just going to do one of these. We're also going to take down the neckline like we did on the top by 5/8 of an inch. I decided 5/8 of an inch instead of an inch. And I think this will give us a much more relaxed fit. So now we're going to add 1/2 inch. After we've come out 1/2 inch, we're just going to align that. That gives us 1/2 inch. Then we're going to take this down 3 3/4 inches. Now what I want to do is make sure these two align front and back and side to side. We'll just true it up. Yeah, see, you can see that this one I mismeasured, and that's probably because I measured from right here instead of measuring it from the entire length of this. From my research, what you do is you match these two right here, where the arm's eye is going to be for the back and the front, and then you can measure down from that. So I need that much more. So what I'm going to do, I'm glad that I did such a long piece of paper, but I'll just mark down from here, and then we'll measure this. We'll do the same measurement on the other side. And now that seam's going to be perfect. And then I already trued up the shoulder seams to make sure they aligned, which they do. So I think that's pretty much all we have to do. We're just now going to make a toile of this. So this looks really good. I'm really pleased with the fit. It's going to fit nice. I think I'm going to add a seam allowance to here in the front just to get it to close a little more. I think maybe it's fine. Anyway, and from the back, you can't really see it because I can't turn back, but this is the right length. It's the right fit. I think we'll add a 5/8 inch seam allowance to the bottom of this, and then it'll be perfect. First thing to note, we're going to actually cut from the other side, so not the fashion fabric side, but the lining side. This is going to be a little tricky because I want to match up the stripes of the faux fur. I have the selvage down here, and we're just going to have to be careful and align this as best we can. So what I'm thinking of doing first is seeing how I want to position this pattern piece. When I was doing my research on faux fur, I found a couple different things. One of them suggestions was to cut with a box cutter. So I have these X-Acto knives that I recently bought for leathercraft, but I think I'm going to try them for this project. So first I'm going to make any of the pattern modifications that I decided on. One of them being to add an inch to the bottom of the vest here. I'm going to try to get as much fabric out of this as possible. So we're just going to have to be really careful when we line everything up. And then you just make small X-Acto knife cuts in this. And then also you want to be really careful and chalk over your pattern. So this, I didn't have to make any adjustments to the back, but I did forget to put the grain line on the front. So I'm going to have to lay those pieces out and retrace that. And now we're just going to cut tiny little cuts so as to not disturb the pile of the fur underneath.
A few moments later.
Oopsies, I made a mistake. There's this thing called nap in fabric, and you probably already know this, but I wasn't thinking, and so I'm going to point it out. So see how my fabric is in the wrong direction? I don't know if you can see that. It should be going up like this, but I cut it up, or I cut it upside down. So unfortunately, there's that. It's not too noticeable on this specific fabric, but I'm not happy about it. But anyway, look at that. We're turning into a vest. And I also cut out the lining pieces. So we're going to stitch up the sides and then we'll stitch the lining together. All right, first things first, we're going to stitch up just the sides. You don't want to stitch the shoulders yet. We'll do that after we put the lining in. And for this project, we're going to use my favorite presser foot, which is the walking foot. This is going to help feed everything evenly through, so it'll be nice and the seams will all match up, because sewing faux fur apparently is very hard. I'm going to test a scrap of fabric and make sure that the stitch length I'm using and everything, it feeds through evenly. That should help everything stay together and look really professional, neat, and polished. Well, how lucky is that? At 3.1 stitch length, which is what I started with, worked perfectly. It looks so nice and professional. The walking foot really helps feed everything through. The only problem that I'm having is getting it started, because unfortunately, the fabric is so thick that it's just hard to feed through. But the walking foot's doing a great job of picking up the slack that I cannot. So yay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch the armhole and the neck edges, leaving the shoulder seam open as well as the front. We'll sew those later. I stitched all of these curves, and now we need to understitch. There is one thing I want to note. At each shoulder seam right here, I made sure to leave 5/8 of an inch opening so that when we flip this all to the inside and turn it right side out, it'll give us the room to do the seam allowances for the shoulders, because I don't want to hand stitch that. But then the lining will get turned down and we'll hand stitch that into place. All right, this understitching is going to be a little frustrating. And then later we're going to pull the fur out of this collar so that it looks intentional. As you get closer to the shoulder seams, you're going to have a harder time understitching. And you want to be careful not to catch anything. So when in doubt, stop, check. Now we're just going to brush out the faux fur where I can, being careful not to catch the lining, because look at that, it just snagged, but oh well. But basically we're just kind of combing out some of the fur from here so that it doesn't get stuck. Now this is going to create a huge mess because you're cutting into that faux fur, but just use the vacuum and be very careful not to cut into the stitching line and not to cut anything you don't want to cut. But hopefully this will release some of the tension on the fabric and get it to flip to the inside. Yay, this is what we have so far. So everything's trimmed now. It just needs to sew up this seam here, which is the outer edge of both sides. We're just going to sew the front seam. We're going to do the hem later, and that's because we want to understitch this as well. This one you won't need to cut because it's not going to curve. And now we do the hem. So you can see I left a big hole in the middle. So between this pen and this pen. Now we're just going to flip this all to the inside where we left our hole. So right here, we're going to just flip this out, and fingers crossed that this looks good. I'm not so sure because there was one section that didn't really, I'll have to show you once I get it all done and flipped out, but I'm just not pleased with how it looks. All right, now it's inside out. And as you can see, the lining is turning to the inside because of our understitching. Now, I will say in the corner, really what I should have done was clip first, then understitch, and maybe not gotten so close to the edge because you can see this is kind of messed up. This is right where the neckline meets. So like here, but anyway, it's fine. So we're going to sew up the shoulder seam. So all we're going to do is marry these two sides together. That's why I left 5/8 of an inch up from the top so that we could stitch the shoulder seams together. And I think what I'm going to do to make my life as easy as possible is sew it just like this and then slip stitch the lining. So the only thing that I did was I tucked one edge under and then turned the other. And because we left that seam allowance open, or because we left 5/8 of an inch open on the top, that allowed us to fold it under. But it looks pretty darn good. So the only thing I don't like is that some of the lining is popping out to the outside. So I've got to figure out a way to get that to lay better. But I think it'll be fine once I start wearing it. Anyway, that's the shoulder seam all done up. And then all that's left is to do those shoulder seams, hemming where the lining is, and then turning up the hem and the lining and sewing that down. So that's all going to be done by hand. The next time you see me will be the final reveal. I am so pleased with the way this vest turned out. It was my first self-drafted pattern, and I have to say, I think I did a pretty good